Laura Brill, I want to welcome you to Freedom Over Fascism.
Oh, it's so great to be with you, Stephanie.
I'm going to introduce you to Laura Brill, who's the CEO and founder of Civics Center. Laura, can you tell us a little bit about Civics Center and what your mission is? Why are you on the other side of this camera from me?
Great. Well, it's first of all, it's great to be with you, Stephanie, and thank you so much for being on this podcast. I'm a big podcast fan and a big fan of yours, and so I just really
Thank you.
appreciate having a chance to speak today. Um, yeah, the mission of the Civic Center is to make voter registration part of every high school in America. And it sounds simple and straightforward, and also at the same time counterintuitive to many people, because many people believe either that young people aren't old enough to register when they're in high school, register to vote, or that even if they did register, it wouldn't matter because they wouldn't turn out. And the reason I started the organization was really because both of those things are untrue. and all across the country, almost everybody is old enough to register or pre-register before they graduate from high school. What we see is that when they do register and you help them understand how voting fits into the democracy and into their ability to have a voice, they turn out at very high rates in high profile elections where people are reaching them. And in so many ways, especially right now, this is the antidote. We train young people and educators to hold voter registration drives in person, in real life, in their high schools, with their friends, in an educational environment. And it's the antidote to so much of the disinformation and the manipulation and isolation that young people and everybody experiences on social media, to say, no, this is your democracy. It's a social function, and you're empowered to do it for yourself. So that's what we're all about.
So I'm curious, does the location of the school matter? And I'm not saying that just as red versus blue, but does the amount of civics education that a high school provides reflect in whether they'll do a drive even, or how many kids will sign up?
Mm. Yeah, it's really interesting. What we have a couple of different types of programs that we offer. So one is just a 1 hour workshop. People can dial in from anywhere in the country, students or educators, and get kind of nuts and bolts how to run a voter registration drive in your high school. What we find is that that's great for people who are already in pretty well resourced schools, like the students who already have a conception of themselves as leaders and have some pre-existing notion that this is what they want to do. They know who their faculty advisor is. The faculty advisor isn't overwhelmed by 18 million other things, or has existing school support for the work. A 1 hour workshop for many, that does not describe many schools and many students who, actually would be interested in this if they had more support and understood, had like a few prior steps to getting involved. And so we work, the other model in which we work is working with state and local partners to reach all kinds of schools, and to help teachers understand how they can support the students, and help students understand how they can work in a community with others. So we've had what we find is when there's a teacher who, and this could be at any kind of school, but where there's a teacher who wants to make this work his own or her own, then they know who the students are who are good student leaders and ambassadors, and that can be in any kind of school, in any location. And then when we have state and local partners, they also have good connections with schools, and we can have in-person events to bring people together to create a community for this work. So I can talk about an example of that, of what's happening in Pittsburgh right now,
Oh,
if
I would
that
love
would
to hear
be
it.
an
Yeah.
interest. Yeah. So in Pittsburgh, there's Allegheny County Youth Coalition that has been working together for a couple of years now to connect with students throughout Allegheny County, but also especially at Pittsburgh Public Schools. And so we're part of this group. And right now in Pittsburgh, there's a mayor's race going on, and the primary is May 20th, and the registration deadline is May 5th. And the candidates from both parties are going to all of the public high schools in Pittsburgh as part of nonpartisan candidate forums to talk to the students and hear what's on their minds. And there's been an effort to, help students come up with really informed questions about the things that they care about. And then after the candidate forums are over, then there'll be voter registration drives. So the students will have had a chance to get a sense of how different candidates are speaking to them, what, about the issues they care about, and then register to vote and then turn out in the primary. For those who aren't old enough yet or don't get a chance to register, the general election is in November. And then also in November of this year, there is a retention election for 3 justices of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So I think there was $100 million, I heard, spent on the Wisconsin Supreme Court election that was earlier this year, which is wild and horrible in so many ways. But, young people, and there was very high youth turnout in that election. And so young people can be very impacted by state Supreme Courts, and for them to start developing an understanding about that, and then to be able to vote in, what I think is going to be a very important election in Pennsylvania this November, and then of course in the midterms. So, when we invest, it's so different from a lot of, last minute money coming in for ads, just blanketing people to turn out without the context and organizing. And so this is really long-term organizing work to help a community turn out.
I have so many questions. So first, just let's be clear for everyone. You're a 501c3, right?
Yes,
so you are nonpartisan. So you just go and say, great vote. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're fiscally sponsored by a 501c3, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you're not like going to schools and saying, hey, you should vote for so-and-so. You're just saying, hey, vote. I am really curious about those candidate forums. What were the questions like? What were the most important things to those high school students?
To the students?
And just, and letting you know that I have an 11th grader myself. So I'm kind of in the thick of high school angst.
Right. Yeah. So they are interested. There's so much polling now about young people, and the Harvard youth poll just came out with updated numbers. But they are interested in their futures. They're very interested in economic issues, in jobs, in housing, in college affordability. They're interested in these. So those are more kind of bread and butter issues. And they're interested in gun violence. They're interested in the environment. They're interested in in equality issues of all kinds. And of course they they don't like the bullying type of, they're taught in school to be nice kids, and so I think and mental health, that's the other thing that I think people really overlook as an electoral issue for young people. I mean, we hear all the time, and any parent of teenagers knows that there's a huge mental health crisis that impacts either young people, either our own kids directly or through their friends. And so they're very concerned about, I think, mental health as this is a bipartisan issue that impacts everybody on many levels. So those are the things they care about.
Yeah. Well, these are also kids who are in middle school with COVID, and, kind of just, there's a BC and an AC of their lives that, that they really feel, I think, pretty intensely. So I am curious. You talk about youth voter suppression as against talking about youth apathy or youth um, disinterest or laziness or all the things the way that youth has been characterized throughout time. And I already think that's a load of BS, but I want to hear the reason you talk about youth voter suppression. What does that look like, and how is what you're doing addressing that?
Yeah, so I do think of it as youth, the disparity in youth turnout compared to older adults as very much youth voter suppression. And I would say the reason I don't think it's apathy and like young people just generally are not as good as older people. They're self-centered. They're all these stereotypes. Well, older people can be kind of self-centered and apathetic too, and we all know students who, I think the thing that having my own teens, I think helped me see this is not a matter of young people just not being inherently good. It's a matter of the structures and systems that we've built. And so I would say when I think about youth voter suppression, I think of it in kind of two different ways. One is just not paying attention. Our adults in designing voter systems just have not paid attention or given resources to the onboarding of young people into democracy. And then there's the real efforts to stop, affirmative efforts. So it's kind of omission and commission in how young people's votes are suppressed. Let me give you an example of something that started out as really active youth voter suppression that I think now is just has been accepted and we don't even see it in terms of its historical context. And then I can give you some other examples. But Motor Voter, which
Mm-hmm.
is the National Voter Registration Act, which in most states requires DMVs or to offer voter registration, that was passed in the early 1990s. And it's a requirement on states to use state agencies for these voter registration purposes. An earlier version of the bill included high schools as mandatory voter registration agencies. That passed the House, but it did not pass the Senate. This was in the late 80s. People don't even I mean I didn't know about that until a few months ago myself, and I've been doing this work for a long time. So that was, if we had had that law pass with high
Right.
schools being mandatory voter registration agencies in the 90s, everything about our electorate would look really, really different today. We'd
Yeah.
have, we might have close to 100% voter registration if we had passed that law in the late 80s. So that is an example of something that actually started out as affirmative youth voter suppression, right? People were saying we do not want. There's a reason in terms of wanting to keep young people from voting that the majority in the Senate at that time voted against that bill, and it had to go forward with a pared back form. Today, since we don't even know, most people don't even know about this. It's just in the water, and it's kind of omission that it's not remedied. um, uh, but that's the biggest act of right today. We could, if there was enough power today, we could fix this and we could even at the state level. States are required to designate additional agencies beyond motor vehicle agencies as state voter registration agencies. So any state in the country right now could say high schools are required to do voter registration, and many states actually do have laws like that, and they're almost never enforced. They're almost never monitored. There's no structure behind it. There's no funding. There's no training. And so that's why I think of it as suppression, because any sensible country, any state, school district, local entity that wanted to get all young people registered to vote would say to itself, "Where are young people as they're turning 18?" they're all in high school.
High school.
They're all in high school. They're right there. They're sitting next to their friends, and so it's very obvious how we could solve this problem with some sustained investment over time that would then be, very easy to repeat. So, and it's a choice not to do that. So that's why I think of it as youth voter suppression.
So do you think, okay, so it's not particularly easy. It's not in their face at their high school. In a lot of places around the country, there is internalized voter suppression. The my vote isn't going to count. It doesn't matter what, everyone's the same. Doesn't matter what I do. Why would I even bother? Do you find that kind of internalized voter suppression among
Mm,
kids, or is it more mechanical that they just
mm.
don't have the wherewithal to register?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's really true. I think there's so many, I mean, these stereotypes of young people don't care and they're apathetic and it doesn't matter anyway, and why would you bother? And government can't work. I mean, they are getting these messages relentlessly, so that's
Right.
that's a this kind of messaging of not to bother is it's a really big problem because yes, you have to overcome that in order to help people say, oh, they're actually none of that is true either, right? It's not true
Right.
that I can't make a difference. Look, I actually can make a difference, especially at the local level. So many ways that sustained investment over time can make a difference. Yeah, so the media environment that young people are in, I think, is most of the, just not helpful to solving the problem.
Well, I think the media that young people consume is different than the media older people consume. And I don't think older people, even people slightly older, have any idea how you would reach kids anyway. I mean, it changes fast and it's pretty localized. Um, and also, nobody's trying. I don't see it, and I always learned uh, in in political science or even government class in high school that um, that politicians and parties and people who want to make people vote focus on people who they know will vote, which is the older populations. And they've never seen younger populations vote that much. So they don't say much about, anything that youth might be concerned about. So it's sort of a self perpetuating cycle. Do you think that if more young people registered, there would be a shift in the conversation
I,
nationally
I
or
do.
regionally?
I do. Because a lot of politicians, especially at the state and local level, where they have not a lot of money to run and not a lot of time often, they're doing exactly what you're describing, Stephanie. They've got the voter file. Their consultants have told them on their limited budget they should go for 50% plus one. They're looking at likely voters and trying to, it's not crazy, right? They're trying to use their money efficiently to get to what they think the result is. And but what that means is that when young people aren't in the voter file, when they're not registered, those candidates with the smallest campaigns, how are they going to find them? They to say to a local somebody running for school board, oh, you should go on TikTok, or that's really hard for somebody who's running for office the first time. And so to try the registration thing, I think people don't necessarily realize. I mean, for students, a lot of light bulbs go off when we say, one of the reasons candidates aren't talking to you is because you haven't registered,
Right.
and you haven't registered because no one's been telling you about this dynamic. But if you do register, you're making yourself available, and there's sort of two elements to it. One is just like the one-on-one. Okay, we now have your address so we can knock on your door and leave literature.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also just the kind of aggregate of the numbers of people looking at a voter file and thinking, is everybody 45 and above? Or what's the, wow, look at all those 18-year-olds. Maybe I,
Right.
just need on the aggregate need to be thinking about things like education, housing affordability, college, pathways, and climate. So,
Right.
um,
I think a lot of them are sort of wanting to, okay, let me just personalize this so I can speak. My kid, great values, does not want to hear about day to day politics, which fair. I talk about it a lot. But as he like goes toward thinking about what his future is going to look like, he asks more questions and he talks more about it. So I think there's something about kind of adulthood staring you in the face. Like, what what am I, either when I graduate from high school and are looking for a job or going on to college, what is going to be out there for me? And the idea that they could actually influence that, I think, is kind of news to them. Um, I am very curious. I've heard the statistic plenty of times that once kids are registered, they vote in very high numbers. Can you tell me about that relationship?
yes, yes. So, in this is another this is also another reason I started the Civic Center, because I was so used to seeing these numbers that young people don't turn out, they turn out at very low rates, they don't care. And when I started looking at voter files and other data sources about this, the exact opposite popped out. It was once young people were registered in high profile races, they turn out at very high rates. So every, this number just kills me, every presidential election, we don't have 2024 yet, but 2020 going back to 2004, more than 75% of registered youth turned out. And
It's
I do pop
astounding.
quizzes. 75, more than 75. In 2020, it was 86% of registered youth turned out. And I talk about this number. I do give little pop quizzes when I talk in different audiences sometimes, and almost everybody gets it wrong. And I got it wrong until I looked at the numbers, and that's why I think that once kids have motivation to vote and understanding how these systems, it's complicated systems, understanding how they work. You're not born knowing it, but once kids are smart, they get it once you sit down and explain it to them. And once you have the motivation to register, um, then you are going to vote.
So you're working with the kids at the high school level. When some of them move on to college, is there sort of a break in continuity there and different sorts of voter suppression, or how does that work among the kids who are moving somewhere else and not staying in the same town?
Yeah, well, we do a lot of work to connect young people to college opportunities and college programs relating to democracy. And this is a challenge in general. What we believe is once you've registered the first time and you understand that it's important, then you're in a position to figure out, okay, do I consider myself a resident of the place I'm going to college so that I'm going to vote there? Am I going to vote in my hometown and request an absentee ballot? But every time people move, it is a continuity question about will they get re-registered? How are they going to cast their ballots? And so we do try to do a lot of education to help people not just register, but effectively cast their votes. I would just say one point about this and the Save Act. I don't know if you've had other guests
Yeah,
talk.
no, not yet. Well, I call it the Slave Act, but
This,
yes.
yeah. So right. So and we call it stop. Um, Americans voting everywhere. That's
Right.
basically SAV. And this would require to register to vote, or when you're or re-register because you're changing your address, you must present documentary proof of citizenship, which is such a narrow category of documents. And many people, especially young people as they're going to college, I didn't bring my passport or my birth certificate to college with me, and I think many other people don't. So this is really active voter suppression, what we were talking about before, as a way, and I think it will harm young people more than many other groups because of how frequently they move, and how, just like the logistics of where you have your documents with you at a particular time. And there's no reason for the law because there's not a problem of non-citizen
So it's
voting. So that, anyway, that's a that we're encouraging. This passed the House for any of your listeners who haven't heard about it. It passed the House. There is an opportunity to stop it in the Senate, and we have an email form on our website to speak out against this passage to the Senate, and we encourage everybody to pick up the phone and call their senators and let them know that it can't pass.
I just saw an interview earlier this week where Heather Cox Richardson, whom I totally revere, uh, was interviewing Angus King, one of the senators in Maine, and she was asking him, okay, you want people to contact their representatives. What's the best way to do that? Is it a phone call? Is it a letter? Is it an email? And at least in his office, but I imagine it's probably the same. The answer was email because it's easier to tally for them.
Interesting.
So I thought I'd just pass that along because I had always heard phone calls were better, but it's, as you think about it, right? They're not going to give the senator all the letters. They're just going to say, okay, we've got 1,500 of these kinds and 500 of those kinds. And so it's easier to sort of tally the emails versus the phone calls. So
That's
just to
interesting.
put that out there.
Yeah, I have kind of heard that maybe phone calls are weighted more heavily because people have to get further from their comfort zone to pick up the phone and call, that versus sending an email. But at a certain level, it's the main thing is to do something. The main thing is to
Well, also it's an intern who's tallying things. I mean, they're not going to give it to a high level person who really thinks about intent so much. So that was a piece of news to me that it might not be true for anybody except Agnes King, but I suspect it is.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so going back to that new act, at least young kids. So it's an extra step for young people to get their birth certificate.
Right.
Their parents may or may not have it. I think it's a little bit more likely that my kid could find his birth certificate than I could. I have no idea. I haven't seen my birth certificate maybe ever. And I would be, if I didn't have a passport, I would be one of those people who changed their name and it's not reflected anywhere.
Yeah.
Right. Except in the social security system and my marriage license and, all of the places where you have to register. So as we think more about this, are there any surprises to you in your work? Things that you didn't expect to be the case when you started to try to get to all the high schools, or something about the students themselves or the teachers, or are there any surprises for you?
Yeah, there's I'm surprised every day. I I'm not sure exactly that this is a surprise, but I have so much appreciation for educators who are interested in doing this work and taking it on. And educators are in the top three groups of people who the students say, yeah, I heard about it through an educator. And so we're devoting more and more time to providing resources for educators in the form of toolkits and curricular materials, and trying to really to talk to as many educators as possible about what they need to make this part of their work. And I think the surprise in this is that when we look at state social studies standards, because every state has curricular requirements and different standards and frameworks, every state we've looked at, preparing young people for citizenship and to be active, engaged adults is there. It's not like hiding. It's part of the basic framework of what is supposed to be going on in high schools. And yet the teachers tell us no one's ever talked to us about voter registration, about how it works, about the fact that you can pre-register to vote. And we have now a full-time manager of educator development, and she's been doing professional development trainings across the country to provide the resources that teachers need. And she's just had such an outpouring of appreciation from the teachers who would say, I go to so many professional development things that really don't help me in my day-to-day work, and this is so on point and filling such a void. And so that's been just a love that's been it's been a lovely surprise in the sense of being able to begin to address the void, and it's been kind of a horrifying surprise in the sense of really understanding the depth of the lack of resources that exist right now for something that I think a lot of people assume is already happening, right? A lot of people will say to me, well, I registered to vote. I had an AP government teacher. And but a lot of it is that haphazard. It's like, did you have a great AP government teacher or not? Which is like the future of
I
our
mean,
democracy should not depend on that circumstance,
right, but the people who A, take APs and B, have a government offering and C, are even interested after that is probably very small compared to the universe of people who are going to be graduating high school within the next year or two. Because
Right.
everyone, I think, at least takes US history, if not government, right? So, like, it seems like I am not surprised that the educators would want. I think that they have so many responsibilities that if they had to go out and figure it out for themselves, it would feel way too overwhelming. But as someone, I'm not surprised that they say, "Oh my gosh, like absolutely, what can I do?" But you have to provide the
Right.
make it easier for them.
Exactly. Exactly. And the other thing I just would say in terms of surprises is about data. So
Mhm.
most youth voting data looks at people ages 18 to 29. Sometimes it's 18 to 35. Sometimes it's 18 to 24, all of which is not particularly helpful for the people who are 16, 17, 18. So half of US teens live in states where they can pre-register at age 16. And the rest, they can almost all of them are old enough before they graduate from high school. Those students are in a really different stage of life, social groups, everything about reaching them is really different than reaching college students or post college students. You can't, we say like, we don't do hot girl summer for high school students. So, it's like you talk to high school students about in a different way, especially when you're in high school. And so being able to show, one of the things we've done is we do a lot of data work, and we look at voter files down to the school district level and down to the level of people who are age 18 or pre-18 to try to figure out what is happening and how do we change it. And so I think and one of the things it shows is just a huge deficit in terms of registration for 18-year-olds. So I'll just give you one other statistic. I talked about youth turnout, high levels of youth turnout once they're registered, but every midterm election of this century, fewer than 35% of 18-year-olds have been registered. So the midterms are coming up in 2026, and 35% is not a good score. And
Right.
and we can measure this. We measure it over and over again, and we can measure it down to the school district level. And so that kind of being able to provide that kind of data has been really powerful, because people see it and they think, okay, well, I can't solve climate change today. I can't um, any other number of issues that are big and beyond the scope of most of us to even think about how we could address them. But you look at your school district and you think, I actually could do that because I know the students and I know the educators and I can ask them to register to vote. And it's a very simple, direct, measurable intervention. And so I just think the power of data and getting that hyper local, hyper age specific data into the hands of the people who are have the ability to make a change, that the power of that has been really meaningful, I think.
So knowing what you know and having the access to the data and knowing how many are registered versus not, do you yet have the capacity to, like, what's your capacity to reach how much of America?
Yeah, we've done data work on down to this like local level in 10 states so far, at least to some degree. We're looking for, and we're actively looking for investors to help us do this at all across the country and at a regular, to update it quarterly or even more frequently where we can, because once we can do that, we can get it into the hands of, again, the local community members who can see it and who can say, okay, let's track this and measure it over time. So that's definitely an area where we're working to grow. We do publish on Substack, basically weekly with new data reports. So the most recent ones are New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, I think, are the most recent ones we've done. So folks can check it out there.
Yeah. What's the
It's
name of the
Substack.
Substack?
Yeah, the Civics Center. The Civics
All right,
Center. Yeah.
Civics Center. So, what states are you actually working in right now?
Yeah. With our in 2024, there were voter registration drives that were registered with us, that we had come through our training in 36 states. This so far in 2024, we're up to, I think, 20 states, and I think it'll get into the 30s. And I'm sorry, in 2025, I think it'll get into the 30s by the end of this year as well. We don't have staff in all those states. We have staff in California, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Florida, and then we work with local partners in many other places. So the places where we have the most robust partnerships also include Arizona and New Hampshire and New York.
So, if I'm a high school teacher or counselor, and I think, what a great idea for my high school, I would love the help. How do they get in touch with you
Yeah.
to start a program in their school or
Yeah,
district?
and actually, I should have said we have staff in New York too, New York and Rhode Island, where I forgot to mention those before. So they get in touch with us on our website. We have it, which is thecivicscenter.org. We have a for students list of resources, and then we have for educators, and they can just go onto those follow those menu drop downs and contact us. And there's students and educators can sign up for one of these 1 hour workshops, or the educators, we offer a one-on-one. You can just use these Calendly links and sign up for a
Mhm.
one-on-one conversation with our manager of youth programs to get started. And then we have just to email. We have info@thecivicscenter.org, or folks can also just leave a message on our Substack. Or we're also at Blue Sky at the Civic Center, and on Instagram at the Civic Center. So we monitor those as well, and people come in
Makes sense.
all those different pathways. Yeah.
Right. Can anyone just register on your website, or if they say, okay, I'm listening to this, I want to register, where do they go?
Yes. So on the website, there's also in the drop down, there's also a register button, and we use TurboVote as our voter registration platform, and folks can use that to register right now, and can put it in if they're can put it in the face of their teens who are old enough to register, and help them work through the process. I will say that one of the things and this goes back to the youth voter suppression issue. Um, Many online systems that states have require you to have a driver's license or state ID in order to use them. So if you're a teen listening to this, or you're a parent with a teen who does not have a driver's license or state ID, first of all, it's really good to get one. So go ahead and try to put that on your list of things to do. But we also have a drop-down menu on our homepage where you can see the age by state when you can register to vote, and we have paper forms linked there that people can download and fill out a paper form if they don't have a driver's license or state ID. So that's the other way to do it.
Well, I'm glad you have those resources on your site, because also finding resources in this vast information landscape can be difficult. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think should be that we should talk about?
No, I think you covered. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think that the biggest thing I want to help people say is that young people really, after I'll say this, after the election of 2024, we heard a lot of people feeling exhausted and just worried about democracy, and kind of paralyzed in terms of feeling. Many people felt that they, invested a lot of money in different things, and I even have heard people say, young people, I'm not interested in, supporting work with young people. And I guess I would just say, um, there's a lot of challenges out there, and a lot of chaos, and a lot of reasons to feel fear and worry. And the students that we work with, we're far ahead right now than we've ever been at this time of any election cycle before. And so they're feeling the same as they've always felt, which is like they want to have a voice. They want to be listened to. They have real concerns about their future. And so I just think for everybody listening, 4 million young people graduate from high school every year. They're facing real challenges, and we cannot give up on them. That's 16 million new potential voters by 2028, 8 million by 2026. And, the way to reach them is where they are with their friends, in their schools, get them talking, help them understand what this is all about and how they can have a positive role. And I just think that I see things shifting a lot in terms of people starting to feel like, okay, I'm ready to re-engage now. I'm ready to kind of get active again. And I would just say, help us get active with youth, talk to young people, talk to the high school in your community, use your own network, and and don't give up.
Thank you so much for coming on.
This has been really lovely, Stephanie. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. Okay.